I'm really happy to introduce John Duggan. Is it?
Duignan.
Duignan.
That's how I pronounce it.
It actually turns out I know John personally. We worked on the tutorial study sessions in UCC. He certainly seemed nice then. So as opposed to me going through kind of his personal story, I think I'll leave you off, because that's kind of the subject of your talk. Yeah. So without further ado, John Duignan.
I like these things very formal, so kind of what I've done here, kind of prepared a framework, if you like, that will serve for a basis for discussion, questions, whatever else. So I'll read forward in a formal fashion for a little bit, and then we'll go from there. All right? Right. So first of all, thanks to Aaron for the invitation to address ye this afternoon. It came as a surprise to discover that we attended the same Lit series during our time in UCC. So we are now, in fact, UCC alumni. Illumina is, it seems, actually just a very posh word for unemployed graduate. Now, the aspect of such forums that I find most stimulating is that of discussion and interaction on the presented subject matter. Now, this for me is at least in part a reaction against the didactic nature of the Scientology method that works intensively to break down the subject's critical participation in the discussion of essential doctrine and dogma. Now, the Scientology precepts are learned as absolute truths, often verbatim. Now, they must be applied exactly. Sorry, I'm just going to put on my reading glasses, old age. The typical Scientologist is utterly. I'm sorry, I'll reread that. So the Scientology precepts are learned as absolute truths, often verbatim. They must be applied exactly. The typical Scientologist is utterly passive in this sense. I'll cover more on this in a bit. Now, for the sake of cultural relativists among us, I want to underline the point that the Scientology culture is the exact antithesis of the secular humanistic approach to pedagogy and andragogy that we find at the Cork Humanities as practicing third-level education and beyond. Now, it is thus my aim to minimize the presentation of my experience and my subsequent assimilation and rationalization of what happened to me during the years I spent in its flow, and instead simply present, sorry, I'm repeating myself here, but the framework upon which we can form a discussion. It is in this light that I have focused on one aspect of the Scientology system, that of the manipulation of the subject's memory. Scientology disingenuously conflates empirical science with mysticism. They do this to quite some effect in the field of memory. In the course of my time in the cult, I distinctly recalled sitting atop an asteroid somewhere in deep space, looking down at the hull of a Zeppelin-shaped interstellar craft butted up against the lower half of my lonely perch. As I sat there, I knew that all of the crew were dead, thanks to the efforts of a monstrous alien that had somehow stored away in the craft. I realized that my body was in fact dead, and that I was at that point, my disembodied self, grieving the terrible loss of my crew and the mission that we embarked upon. I dated the incident, as the subject is required to do, to some 45 million Earth years prior. The recalled event acted to deepen the commitment that I had to Hubbard to the point of fanaticism. Now, what occurred in fact was a thin membrane that demarks the line between the conceptualization of what comprises reality and fantasy has been successfully breached by the insidiously constructed insanity machine that best describes the Scientology system. Any reading of accounts from Scientologists that progress to and beyond the state of clear, that's in the Scientology system, will reveal that past life recalls such as mine are not just commonplace, but are essential to that level of indoctrination. The incident that I just recounted took place in 1987, while I was undergoing an intensive and lengthy Scientology process called the grades. Now, these comprised one-on-one sessions with an auditor, This is a person trained to read an electrocyclometer to which the subject is hooked and to interrogate based on the readings what that meter indicates. These sessions are exhaustive. They can go on for as much as 6 hours straight. They are designed to bring thoughts and memories to the fore. They are profoundly invasive. When first encountering incidents of the past life variety, they often function to cause a meter reaction called a floating needle. Whenever such a reaction occurs, the session must be ended, which is always a relief, and the experience must be verified by a third party on a separate meter. The purpose of this is to validate the memory, to make it real in other words. Memory and sense of place and time are, unfortunately, malleable in the extreme. Professor of neurology at New York University School of Medicine, Oliver Sacks, opens an article on this topic rather poetically. We now know that memories are not fixed or frozen, like Proust jars or preserves in a larder, but are transformed, disassembled, reassembled, and recategorized with every act of recollection. The creation of false memories in the context of the Scientology world is and has always been actively encouraged. This is a fundamental component in the design of a Scientology machine. Through this mechanism, a sense of credibility can be ascribed to the subject. It must be true if I can recall it. I can argue without equivocation that all of us who formally adhered to the thought system were, if not utterly ignorant, then at least seriously deficient in our comprehension of evidence-based research in the field of psychology. We were thus quintessentially not placed, and indeed reluctant, to question such an exciting prospect, as was posited by Hubbard. With this much vaunted Hubbardian breakthrough, we could explore the very history of humankind, not as passive students, but as full-blown actors in the great dramas and struggles of our recent and distant pasts. Had I been passionate about music back then, I'm sure I would have recalled studying under Mozart or Chopin. There are many present and former Scientologists who recall being Alexander the Great, Dido of Carthage, or even Jesus of Nazareth. Some have even recounted having been Adolf Hitler. As a side note, upon reflection, it now seems very likely that not very long before I had recovered that asteroid moment from the depths of my infinite experience, that I had seen the second installment of the Ridley Scott trilogy, Aliens. The film came out in the UK in August 1986. It is nigh on impossible to disprove a memory. Memories are constructed from objective, externally derived experience and subjective rationalization of environmental stimulus. That Hubbard worked out how to manipulate the credulous in this way cannot be considered revolutionary or even surprising. Religious cults have been doing this for as long as humans have been functioning as symbiotically supportive pairs. The logical shutdown required of a Catholic to consume the flesh and blood of Christ is a silent example of the type. The Hubbard paradigm, using his skills as a sci-fi writer, simply made this ancient mystical religious concept sexy. All Scientology inductees experience throughout the course of their early indoctrination the implicit emphasis that the doctrine placed on past life, the implicit emphasis that the doctrine placed on the past life experience. This level of indoctrination was so prevalent, so intrinsic, and so alluring, and yet never explicitly stated, that it bypassed one's critical analysis filters. The hints that were dropped as to the existence of past lives and implications that these could, through Scientology, be explored, served to pique the credulous neophyte's curiosity. Thus, by the time they were sitting down for the first big sales interview, they were well primed to put cash on the table for this. It could be argued that the softening up process prepares the subject for the fabrication of past life memories. Now, these past life memories may be analogous to the emotional contract described as the suspension of disbelief that one enters into when sitting down to watch a movie. Now, to move from the general to the specific, I might mention the very moment that I was doing my first tour of the bookstore in the Scientology mission of Stuttgart in southern Germany. Now, my eyes lighted upon such books as How You Live Before This Life and Mission into Time. In practically every tape lecture I listened to from a course called The Student Hat onwards, Hubbard never missed an opportunity to delve deeply into his previous incarnations, be it that of a Hessian mercenary in the American War of Independence, or as a Marchavian race car driver in a galactic confederacy that included Earth as a prison planet. Social pressure also played a huge role in encouraging, if not subtly demanding, that one remember former past lifetimes. Ideally, that would include a prior stint in the cult during its formative years in the 1950s and 60s, or perhaps in some far distant galaxy fighting alongside Hubbard against the plethora of interstellar villains. To reach the exalted state of clear, one had little option but to remember his past incarnations. And more disturbingly, emotional pressure from children as young as 8, remembering and being encouraged to remember having been at St. Hill or the flagship Apollo long before they were conceived. Now, I'm not at all surprised that I discovered clear memories of walking the St. Hill grounds in some faded black and white or sepia past within the first few months of my arrival there. But I am deeply saddened by the loss of the life that could have been were it not for my youthful naivety and incredulity. Now, in closing this part of the proceedings, I want to provide a concrete example of how this thought framework can impact on how a Scientologist conducts himself in the real world. The practice of Scientology is not supposed to be merely an esoteric belief, but rather a worldview that pervades every facet of the person's life. I'm picking on Tom Cruise here. I have little or no sympathy for the guy. He set himself up as Scientology's frontman. He went out and evangelized for the cult at every opportunity. What did he expect? That the world would roll over like a puppy for its belly to be tickled? Surprise, surprise. He hit a wall of criticism and derision. The real world does not like Scientology. People in the real world think and critically evaluate. This came as a shock to him. The now famous Tom Cruise meltdown describes the stop-frame train wreck of what had been an enviable, if not unassailable, celebrity public profile. Who can forget his insistence that Brooke Shields should not be taking antidepressants, as there is no chemical basis for such things as postpartum depression? Or what his aggressive assertion to Matt Lauer, I know history of psychiatry and you don't, that he knew better for what was good for Brooke than she or her doctor could possibly know. Then there was a counter-jumping incident in the Oprah Winfrey show. Actually, it could be argued that it was his inflated ego living in that rarefied and costed celebrity world that had been created around him that was, is, and will continue to be his stumbling block. That swollen balloon has been so seductively stroked and so carefully manipulated by his masters in the weird and distorted Scientology land that he felt he could dump the woman who made him. Not Nicole Kidman, but his former unassailable publicity agent, Pat Kingsley. Now, he appointed in her place his utterly unqualified nobody of a sister. As they say in the Scientology land, what the fuck? Tom Cruise wanted to be free to promote his one real passion, Scientology. Kingsley would not let him, so he dumped her and persuaded his sister to recall all of her past lifetimes as an agent and manager of movie stars. And then he put her on post. Cruise's Scientology belief tells him that we have lived for millions of lifetimes, and that each of us have thus, in past incarnations, presided over planetary systems, flown spaceships, and even managed the careers of movie stars. This is a fundamental precept within the Scientology system of staff appointments and training. You will find it in the most basic of Scientology on-to-post checklists, on-to-post training checklists. That worked out rather well, didn't it not, Tom? The following are a couple of... Now, I'm just going to close here now with a couple of quotes, right? These are from a very important, I suppose, fundamental policy letter, or piece of scripture, whatever you want to call it. Every single Scientologist must study, not once, but every time he embarks upon a course. Every time. So, in the duration of your Scientology career, you might study this, you might read this 1,000 times, right? So, and I'm going to read a number of quotes from it, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions from it, okay? So, here's where the first quote begins. If you want to actually, if any of you have ever been brave enough to try and explore anonymous websites and dig up the L1 Hubbard recordings, you can imagine here Hubbard's sleazy, sonorous voice assaulting your ears with the medium of an old reel-to-reel tape deck. We will not speculate here on why this was so or how I came to rise above the bank. We're dealing only in facts, and the above is a fact. The group left to its own devices would not have evolved Scientology, but with wild dramatizations of the bank called New Ideas would have wiped it out. Supporting this is the fact that man has never before evolved a workable mental technology. And emphasizing this is the vicious technology he did evolve: psychiatry, psychology, surgery, shock treatment, whips, duress, punishments, etc. ad infinitum. When someone enrolls, consider that he or she is joined for the duration of the universe. Never permit an open-minded approach. If they're going to quit, let them quit fast. If they're enrolled, they're aboard. And if they're aboard, they're here in the same terms as the rest of us. Win or die in the attempt. Never let them be half-minded about being Scientologists. The finest organizations in history have been tough, dedicated organizations. Not one bunch of namby-pamby, panty-waist dilettantes have ever made anything. It is a tough universe. The social leader makes it seem mild, but only the tigers survive, and even they have a hard time. We'll survive because we are tough and are dedicated. When we do instruct somebody properly, he becomes more and more tiger. When we instruct half-mindedly and are afraid to offend, scared to enforce, we don't make students into good Scientologists, and that lets everybody down. When Mrs. Pattygate comes to us to be taught, turn that wondering doubt in her eye into a fixed, dedicated glare, and she'll win and we'll all win. Humor her and we all die a little. The proper instruction attitude is, you're here, so you're a Scientologist. Now we're going to make you into an expert auditor no matter what happens. We'd rather have you dead than incapable. We're not playing some minor game here in Scientology. It isn't cute or something to do for lack of something better. The whole agonized future of this planet, every man, woman, and child on it, your own destiny for the next endless trillions of years, depend on what you do here and now with and in Scientology. This is a deadly serious activity. And if we miss getting out of the trap now, we may never again have another chance. Remember, this is our first chance to do so in all the endless trillions of years of the past. Don't muff it now because it seems unpleasant or unsocial. Do. Again, points for 7, 8, 9, and 10. Do them and we'll win. Now, that closes essentially my formal briefing. Just the final point here. I'd ask you to check out my website, johnduignan.ie, where the full text of this address will be posted up by tomorrow. Now do this for the sake of your enlightenment and entertainment, not your eternal survival.